So this whole signaling communication aspect is talking about motor unit recruitment. The first question is, what is a motor unit? Remember, I have made comments in previous lectures that you never really separate the nervous system by itself and the muscular system by itself. That the muscular system doesn't exist without the nervous system, and the nervous system can't really do anything in the environment without the muscular system. So you're really talking about the neuromuscular system. And so we depict this like this, where we have the neuron and we have this coming down, but it really looks like this, where you have the neuron and you have this coming down and you have this integration to all these muscle fibers and the myofibrils. And so what a motor unit is, it's the motor neuron, right? Because remember, you have sensory neurons and you have other types of neurons, but you have a neuron that is dedicated to sending motor signal down. And so you will have a motor neuron and it has an innervation into the muscles. So all the muscles it controls. So what a motor unit is a motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it innervates. And so you can kind of see that it splits down, and you can have a motor neuron that's communicating with several muscle fibers. And so here's some kind of recap of that. Is a motor unit consists of the motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it innervates. And so you can have within one nerve track, remember this is on the motor aspect of the highway, you can have 3 alpha motor neurons that are coming down. And you can see that the motor neurons are intervening or innervating certain muscle fibers. And so all the purple here are from that purple alpha motor neuron, and these blue are those blue, and that red is that red. So you have 3 motor units here, and a motor unit includes the motor neuron, just one motor neuron, and all the fibers it innervates. So you can have different ratios. You can have one motor neuron can innervate multiple muscle fibers, but you can see here that you don't see any overlapping. Like this muscle fiber is only innervated by this blue motor neuron, so motor unit number 2. And this red one is only by that red one. But you can see that this one red motor neuron has multiple muscle fibers under its control. You can kind of see it better here, where you have here's the sensory part of the nerve, here's the motor part of the nerve, and then it's on the same highway coming down here. And you can have 2 different motor units. So you have one motor neuron, another motor neuron, and you have these muscle fibers here. And so you have the motor neuron and the muscle fibers. The motor unit is the neuron, the alpha motor neuron, and all the muscle fibers that it innervates. And so here's the recap here, that there are typically multiple muscle fibers under control. So it's never just a 1-to-1 ratio. And then what you see here is that only one muscle fiber is controlled by a nerve, but a nerve can control multiple muscle fibers. So when you look at the slide here, you can have different ratios of how many muscle fibers are under control of a motor neuron. And when you have maybe like fine motor control, it's like for your eyeball, you might have one motor neuron that controls maybe 4 muscle fibers. But when you look at like the glute, that's more of a force output, one motor neuron might control thousands of muscle fibers. So it really depends on if you need more fine motor control or more gross motor control. But again, you have your alpha motor neuron, and then you have the end muscle fiber here, and you'll have the one motor neuron that's controlling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 7 fibers here. And this would be your general aspect. For like say your eyeball, you're going to have one motor neuron that's controlling 4 muscle fibers. And then for, let's say, like your glute, you'll have one motor neuron that's controlling hundreds to thousands of fibers. And again, you have one nerve that connects to multiple muscle fiber, whether it's a lot of muscle fibers or just a few. You have that one to several relationship. Now remember, this is all stop and go, right? You're either getting go signal from the nervous system, or you're getting a stop signal from the nervous system, or a no signal. So these zeros and ones that are communicating, the force output of the muscle can also be varied by the frequency of those go signals. So although it's only communicating on, off, yes, no, positive, minus, consider the action potential, that signal coming down, to be like a wave that can be added to each other. So you can have something like this, where you have this summation, where you can have like one action potential, another action potential. You get a couple, but if you time them appropriately, you can get them to all stack on each other, so you have one big output. And so it would look like this, where you have here's your action potential. So boom, you're sending a signal or sending 2 signals, and when you're getting this go signal, you're getting a little muscle twitch. And then you can send 2, bang bang, you might get a little bit of more of a switch. And if you send 4 of them down, And if you send them and instead of saying go or go go, and you're saying go 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 go, you can get this continual stimulation where you can ramp up your tension or force production from the muscle. So just keep in mind that as you start to train, you're not just training the muscle fiber themselves, but you're also training how effectively the nervous system is communicating down there. And so if you end up getting better neural connections, neural pathways, you can end up with better force output. We'll talk about it in later lectures, but your amount of strength that you have isn't just based on your muscle fiber, it's based on the signaling you're getting from the nervous system. How fast your car drive isn't just a product of how great your motor is. Your driver can make a big difference in that. So when we look at these muscle fibers, there's a couple principles that we're going to look at. And this first one here is the all or none principle. And basically what they're saying is there's no such thing as a motor neuron that stimulates just some of the muscle fibers. And when a muscle fiber gets a go signal from the nervous system, the entire thing is contracted. So you can't do partial muscle fiber contraction. That motor neuron and all the muscle fibers that it innervates, if that's getting a go signal from the brain, every single fiber is generating force, and it's generating force at the same time. So you can have circumstances where this guy's on, motor unit 2 is on, and motor unit 1 is off. But if motor unit 2 is on, every single fiber that it connects to is on. And if motor unit 1 is on, every single fiber is on. But if motor unit 1's off, you can't have a situation where this one's on and this one's off. You also can have a situation where, you look here at the motor neuron and it's connecting to the one part of the fiber. It really is connected to the entire length of the fiber. So if these sarcomeres are shortening, so are these ones way down here, right? So the whole thing is consistent. The other principle is the size principle, and we haven't talked about it yet, that you have different size muscle fibers, each with different physiological properties. So you have smaller muscle fibers. These are always recruited first. And you have larger muscle fibers that are recruited after. And there's a very specific order. And that's what the size principle is that smaller muscle fibers are recruited before larger muscle fibers. Let's talk about the different types of fibers. So again, you have two types of nerves, two major categories of nerves, and you have two types of receiving ends of the muscle fibers. So you have type 1 nerves that are controlling slow twitch muscle fibers, and you have type 2 nerves that are controlling fast twitch muscle fibers, and they're always paired this way. So a lot of times you'll see people just say one or the other, type 1 slow twitch fibers, because you never have anything outside of the sort. But you basically have your slow twitch fibers, which are more of your endurance fibers, and you have your type 2 fibers, which are more your fast twitch fibers. Now, these are general categories, and you have a spectrum that really exists. So you have your type 1 fibers depicted on this end, and you have type 2 fibers depicted on this end. But the size principle is showing that in order for me to recruit these fibers, all of these ones have to be recruited first. And this is all dependent upon the performance you're expecting or how much force that you need. Here's your fiber spectrum, right? So your type 1 would be here, your type 2 would be here. But as you can see, there's a whole spectrum that exists in between. So it's not just like you have type 1 and type 2, that's it. You have type 1, then you have a little bit bigger type 1, and again, the bigger the muscle fiber, the more force output you have. Your type 1 fibers are your endurance fibers, but they don't come out and say endurance fibers. These are fatigue resistant fiber. And the trade-off for the fatigue resistance is that they produce pretty much low tension. They don't really have that force producing capabilities. Your type 2 fibers, you have high force output, but they're fatigable. So you get a lot of bang, but you don't get a lot of, you're not able to go for a long period of time. So the high force and tension. Since there's a spectrum that exists, these fibers are broken down a little bit into type 2A and type 2B, or sometimes referred to as type 2X. And so the type 1 fibers are still endurance, fatigue resistance, but then you have like this spectrum where as you move to the right, you can generate a little bit more force, but you trade off a little bit more fatigue. And so over here, your type 2 when you had your type 2 from before, your type 2B or type 2X, these are still your very high force producing, like the highest amount of tension you can produce, but they poop out really fast. Like you can only use them like 3 or 4 times. But then as you start to move to the left here, you're getting more fatigue resistant. So this is like your mama bear, this is your papa bear, and this is baby bear, just right. And so that looks like this here, where you see you can see your capacity here, type 1, type 2A, type 2B. And you can see that these are low speed of contraction, low force capability, but extremely high resistance to fatigue. They're going to have a high mitochondria content because of the energy producing for their endurance, and they're going to have a high amount of aerobic capacity, right? But we'll talk more about that later. What I want you to focus on is really the force versus the fatigue resistance, and you can see that type 1 are low force capacity but high fatigue resistance. Type 2B or type 2X are high force capacity but low fatigue resistance, and then type 2A are just a happy medium between the two. So that's your spectrum that exists between these fibers. So back on the size principle for recruitment, if I have a force that requires just a little bit amount of effort, I'm going to recruit whatever I need to get that task done. And the way the body works is it recruits a little bit more, and it continues to recruit motor units until I get the desired outcome. So let's say that wasn't enough force, my body will continue to recruit muscle fibers until I get the desired output, and I start moving, that's my force output, right? So it recruits here first, and in order to recruit this, all of these had to be recruited fast. Now, you look at the far right here, and if I get full recruitment of the muscle fibers, this rarely happens. This would be your body using 100% capacity, and that just doesn't exist. Your body always operates with a certain amount of reserve capacity. And so in this case, your body would probably never get past like these upper units. So part of aggressive training, when you look at like upper level athletes, they're not necessarily adding more resources. What they're learning to do is teaching the body to tap into more and more of that reserve capacity. So again, here's your spectrum of muscle fibers. They recruit in this order, small to large, and they're all dependent upon the force output. You would never, ever have a situation where these large fibers are recruited and these lower fibers are not recruited, right? If I need to recruit this much force for that amount of activity, I'm going to go from this first and then this. It's going to keep on ramping up until that threshold is hit, and boom, I got my force output. And again, you rarely get to the situation where this is recruited. Lower fibers recruited first, and then your type 2. If I'm recruiting type 2 fibers, that means all my type 1 fibers are on. If I'm recruiting type 1 fibers, that doesn't necessarily mean my type 2 fibers are on, right? So it's going to be a threshold. These are going to recruit first and then continue down that path. So when you're looking at like here's your type 1, type 2A, type 2B, your type 1 fibers are always on if you're generating force. And then if you need more force or more output, your type 2s are going to, and you're going to continue recruiting larger and larger muscle fibers until that task is met. So you can kind of look at that as like your endurance fibers are going to be more appropriate for long distance running. And then your middle distance running are going to be like those type 2A fibers, and then your sprinting type 2B fibers. So this is interesting when you look at program design, that this is basically intensity, right? The more intensity you're putting into the system, the more larger fiber recruitment you're going to need to get. And so when I'm here, if I'm doing a jog or just a walk, I'm recruiting these low muscle fibers, but I'm not necessarily stimulating these. If I'm doing a sprint, I'm over here on this end of the spectrum. If I'm recruiting these fibers, that means I'm also recruiting these fibers here. So you get a trickle-down effect from higher intensity exercises. If I do high intensity exercise, I'm going to get better at low intensity exercise as well. If I do low intensity exercise, I'm not necessarily going to get better at high intensity exercise. And so we're looking at cardiovascular, but let's say we looked at this in terms of loading. So let's say you took a weight that you can only do 12 times, that's going to be these muscle fibers here, versus a weight that you can only do like 3 or 4 times, that's going to be these muscle fibers over here, right? So you're doing more load, more tension. If I train with weights that I can only do 4 or 5 times, I'll get better with weights that I can do 10 times, 12 times, 15 times, and 20 times. But if I work out with weights that I only lift 15 times, I'll get better at 15, 20, 25, but I might not get stronger because I'm never really recruiting these larger muscle fibers. I might not get better at lifting weights 5 reps, 6 reps, and so forth, right? So when you lift heavier weights or run faster, you'll get a trickle-down effect, but if you do lower intensities, you don't get that reverse aspect. Now what I want to share with you is that when you look at these different motor units, each motor unit is the same type of muscle fiber. So in this case, let's say motor unit 1, these are all going to be the same size muscle fibers. They're all going to be the same type. They're all going to be type 1. And then motor unit 2, they're all going to be type 2A, and motor unit 3, they're all going to be type. So you'll never have a motor unit that has mixed muscle fibers. So when you're looking at force production, your body will recruit muscle fibers on the size principle, and so they'll recruit motor units in order as well. And again, it kind of depicted that. Again, just to recap, your fast twitch fibers, these are for strength and speed, but the trade-off is they fatigue sooner. So this is more of your like white meat in your chicken, right? Because it's not, chickens don't fly a lot, they mostly walk. And so they need those bursts of speeds to kind of move really quickly. Chickens don't really fly that much either, but they have that, whether it's you can look at a turkey or goose, all the same aspect. And then your slow twitch fibers, they're going to have more darker fibers because of the amount of hemoglobin and blood flow that's going there for this endurance aspect. When you look at your sporting events, you can kind of see here which is more fiber type dominant. So you get your type 1 versus your type 2. So your 100-meter sprint, these are your short and sweet. You're over in less than 10 seconds. These are going to be type 2 dominant and not a lot of type 1 fibers. Your 800-meter run, this is kind of a sprint and an endurance event, right? Your 400 and 800s are weird events. They're going to be, that's why they're some of the most challenging, is that, as we'll talk about in the muscle adaptation, you don't really change muscle fiber type. You can get some lateral changes from left to right. If you look at the spectrum of fibers, type 1s don't convert to type 2 and type 2 don't convert to type 1. But you might get a little lateral shift where if you train enough, these fibers will take on more characteristics like this. These will more character. So you can get like a lateral shift one fiber over, but you're not going to radically change the amount of type 1s you have to type 2 and vice versa. This is pretty much genetically set. Again, you can get some adaptation. Let's say you're built more type 2 for sprinting. It doesn't mean that if you do a lot of sprinting, you won't end up with type 2 fibers. You'll get more of your type 1 fibers that look like type 2, but you usually naturally gravitate to the sports that you are genetically, that you're well at, that come easy to you, that you enjoy. And so if you're shaped like a sprinter because you're more type 2 dominant and you have bigger muscle mass, you're going to do much better at sprinting than you are at distance running. Doesn't mean you can't do distance running, just means it's going to come easier for you for the distance running. And if you think about, if you just poll a lot of people and say, do you prefer to do distance running or sprinting? You're going to have some people that are like, oh, I love distance running. I would be willing to wager that they're mostly type 1 dominant. And if they say, no, I don't want to do distance running, I prefer to sprint, they're probably going to be type 2 dominant and vice versa. So that's really it when we look at muscle fiber types and muscle fiber contraction. There's a lot going on there. You have muscle fibers, you have different types of fibers, and your strength, your force output is a product of not just your muscle fiber, but the nervous system input to that.